Athletor Podcast. Once again, dude, it's been far too long, Matthew Ciampa. Thank you for coming through and talking wrestling as we do, and probably do nothing else aside from talk wrestling when we see one another.
Good point.
Thank you again. So tell me, you know what? How about this? You suck at self-promotion. I'll do a better job of so Matt Ciampa is probably the best wrestling coach that no one listening or watching this podcast has ever heard of, because he's so bad at self-promotion. Matt, tell people when you started coaching, because God, I talk about Eclipse, and because it just has such an interesting foundation.
All right. Yeah. So just to give everybody a little perspective, my first year coaching would have been your freshman year of high school.
92.
So I finished wrestling in college the 91-92 season, and up until that point, my coach, the founder of Eclipse, Rick Broadman, had been running a club for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years at least. And he got to the point, and oddly enough, he was about as old as I am now. And he told me one day he came up to me and said that he didn't want to spend his time on his weekends sitting in the gym at wrestling events. He'd rather go play golf once in a while. And I thought he was the craziest. I couldn't wrap my head around how anybody could think that way.
What? That's just crazy talk.
And so he asked me if I wanted to, take the stick and run the club. So the following season, I started running Eclipse, and that would have been the spring of 1993. And now that I'm about the same age he was when he was, making the transition from wrestling coach to golf player, I'm not making the transition out of wrestling, but I'm hoping to get involved at a different level than coaching high school.
Well, you're looking to go back to your alma mater, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm hoping. I've been volunteering at East Stroudsburg University. I was teammates at ESU with the head coach, Aniba Nieves, and he was kind enough to ask me if I would like to help out, and maybe in a year or two, there might be a paid assistant job. I could retire from teaching and take that job and, work with some older kids, which I haven't really done all that much. So I'm looking forward to that opportunity. But, I still like working with the kids, the youth kids and the high school kids too. But it'll be fun to work with
real athletes.
I don't know if I want to say kids are a little bit more mature, because boy, are some of those kids dopes. But it's already different. Just spending a little time in a college room has been really, and the room where I trained, it's a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to that. But with Eclipse, I had a great time. I was fortunate enough to work with some really, really great kids. Some of them got their hand raised a whole bunch, some of them not too much, but in either direction, it was always lots of fun.
Matthew, you say some of them got their hand raised a bunch. Can you rattle off just how many national champions you guys have had?
Oh my gosh. At USA wrestling, freestyle, and Greco-Roman events, I don't know, I'm gonna guess maybe 20 kids.
20 kids have won it.
Yeah, and a bunch of them multiple times. So yeah, we're fortunate. Mr. Brumman built that foundation. I mean, he had champs, while I was in high school still. So, I trained with some of those guys, and I inherited some of those kids. A kid like Corey Posey, about your age.
Westfield. Westfield kid, yeah.
And he was training with Mr. Broadman when he was in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, before I started running the club, and he ended up winning some age group titles, wrestled, junior worlds, university worlds. Kid named Nick Ficchetti from Cranford. He was one of Mr. Broadman's guys too. So I inherited a good group, and managed to keep the ball rolling a little bit.
Yeah,
so
I'll say. I mean, you're leaving out the Joey McKennas of the world, and the list of Eclipse kids that have excelled in international styles is really long.
It was fun. I mean, listen, we were a freestyle and Greco club. I mean, that we started
But
in
that's
March,
that
and
in
we
and
went
of
to the end of
itself,
juniors.
right? But that in and of itself was fairly, I don't want to say the word novel, but it was peculiar, right? Because I mean, let's be honest about it. The money in club wrestling is in folk style, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, so there was never.
No,
you guys didn't ever really concern yourselves with, money.
So if you referenced, I'm not real great at promoting myself. I'm less successful at making money off of wrestling.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you there.
Mr. Broadman had a philosophy. It shouldn't cost money to learn how to wrestle. And, I hold true to that now. I mean, so when I first started coaching, I ran my practices at a high school, local high school. And, it cost $15 to come train with us in the early 90s.
Period.
You paid $15, you got a t-shirt, and you got to come to practice 2 days a week.
2 days a week for 3 months, 4 months.
4 months, yeah, a little bit plus 4, I think. By the time we got back from juniors,
$15.
And it was fun. It was funny because sometimes I'd hear parents like, I talked to my friend and his kid's going to another club, and I try to tell him he should come and train with you guys, and he would tell us, well, it can't be that good if that's all it costs. I'm like, all right, fine. It was, I liked having kids at practice. I really did. You don't want to show up to a room and there's 4 kids there, unless it's a private. If you only have 4 kids in the room, that's no good. But in the same context, I wanted kids who wanted to be there. I didn't want kids who were forced out of their house because their parents said, I paid this much money for you to go to practice. You better get your ass to practice.
Yeah,
so,
but
and we got all kinds of kids. That was the best part about it. I mean, we got all kinds of kids came to our room. I mean, I remember we had a kid come in. The kid was originally from Egypt. So I'm thinking, all right, this kid's from Egypt. This is about 10 or 15 years ago. And it was like remember Muhammad Lawal started doing MMA.
Sure.
So it was like in the beginning of it, like he was done wrestling and started fighting.
He was in the 08 trials finals or something like that, right? So right after that, it was 2009-ish.
Yeah, give or take, right around there. And so I can't remember, his name was Muhammad and whatever followed that, but we called him King Mo.
Right.
So he comes to practice. He said, he wants to wrestle Greco at junior nationals. Like one of his high school teammates went a year or 2 before, and he wants to go, so it was after the Greco State. So now you may remember young Rich Santoli a little bit. So anyway, I go to Rich. I go, Rich, I got this kid from Egypt. He wants to wrestle Greco. Can we petition him on the team? And Rich is like, yeah, if the kid wants to wrestle, we'll put him on. We got spots. So he's been coming to practice, and I'm watching him, and I'm like, this kid doesn't look like he's got that much of a background. So I'm watching him. So we get him out there, and at the time, what we would do is when we'd start our live goes, you shake hands with your opponent, and then you start wrestling. And some kids would shake hands and they'd step back, and then they'd step forward and start wrestling. And some kids would try and get the jump on you and shake hands and go get you. So we're at his first match out at Fargo, and he shakes hands with the kid, and then boom, he's all over the kid.
Didn't wait for a whistle.
So he's in the bout with this kid. They're going back and forth. He's in the bout with the kid, and he ends up getting pinned. So he comes off the mat, and I'm talking to him, and I'm like, man, you must have been really nervous. I said, I know it's your first match at junior nationals, but you got to wait for the whistle to blow. He goes, that was my first match. That was his first match his whole life was at juniors, and he was in the bout. So
I mean,
like having that kid in the room was awesome. And he didn't win it. He lost his next match. But again, he scored points. He scored points in both bouts. He defended up until a point. But, like having the opportunity to have kids like that in the room, and that's the same room, like in that same room, like if I rattle off names, so McKenna was in that room. Ashnault was in that room. Spencer Carey, who won a U20 national championship, was in that room. And then we had, I don't know, maybe about 6 or 7 kids who were multiple time double style, All-Americans at either, U17s or juniors or cadets or whatever, the age division tournaments. Like in that room, we took 13th at Fargo, like just the kids in the room. Took 13th.
So you're saying,
in Cadet Greco.
So now we're talking. So that's where I love your self-promotion sucks so bad that I have to get into minutia with you in order to pull it out of you. So you just said something that's pretty impressive, right? Like,
yeah, we had 7 All-Americans
from the club.
Just in Cadet Greco. That was only in Cadet Greco because we had a few that placed in juniors too. Mm-hmm. But that was just in Cadet Greco. And here's the best part about that group is out of those 7 kids, and I could be wrong, could be 6, could be 8, but let's just say there's 7. Out of those 7 kids, only 2 of them had a folk style state medal. So these are kids that aren't really winning at the highest level locally, but they could win matches out of junior nationals, out of cadet nationals.
What do you attribute that to?
It's the room. At the time, it's me, it's Larry Levinstone, it's Bobby Shear, Anthony Liardi, and John Gray. So there's 5 of us in the room, and John was kind of in and out at that point. He was, a mainstay with us for about the 5 years before, because by that time his younger brother Mark had already graduated high school and moved on to Cornell. So John was coming around a little bit. He was still part of the program, but between Anthony Liardi, like I said, Bobby Shear, and Larry Levinstone. I mean, if I didn't go to practice, it was like it didn't matter if I was there with those guys in the room. And they were great workout partners. They were great teachers. They were great mentors. And so we had a group of kids in that room that there was always a pair of eyes on those guys. And like if you were in our room, we wouldn't miss a beat. Like your level of technique and in your aptitude for the sport would have helped us, but your demeanor and your personality would have fit in even better.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So like that was our crew. And we would, when a kid got something right, we'd let them know they got something right. And when they did something wrong, we'd let them know that they did something wrong. But every now and again, if you did something that, like kind of crossed a line for us, and I don't want this to come out in the wrong way, and we had a very zigzaggy type of a line, but if you crossed the line, we kind of, there was, I don't know what the language parameters are on this podcast.
Oh, you can go right ahead, son.
But there was a fair amount of ball breaking going on. And
so,
like it was fun, and the kids, like we wouldn't cross the line and make a kid feel bad, but there were certain things that you didn't want to do wrong, or
you got to give me an example. You got to give me an example.
It was, so we would say, good habits or bad habits, and like if somebody was half-assing their way through one of their techniques, like one of us would just walk by and get like just stare him down as we're walking by, and then you walk past the kid and the kid thinks he's out of the woods, and then it'd be like, good habits or bad habits. Or we'd say, you're either getting better or you're getting worse. And then it'd be the same thing. And it would like you could just see the kids would be like, oh, you know, and it was fun, you know, like they got the joke, but they also got the context. Hey, we're not trying to beat the kid we could already beat in here. The whole premise of our practice, our system was to win the matches you're not supposed to win, and everything else is useless, you know. And you know, like we try to encourage kids to do something a certain way that it could work on everyone. And if you're not the fastest, it should still work. If you're not the strongest, it should still work.
You can stop it right there. Joel, I'm going to give you an even better Matthew Ciampa story.
No.
I don't know, it's 2010. So I was 67 years old. And
can I tell it? It's way more funny from the viewer's perspective, I think.
Fine. Proceed.
So you brought it up. So
fine.
So we in New Jersey, we had a great system for years. When I finished college, I wrestled in these events. You know, like these would be good events to demonstrate to the kids that you're training, you know, that, hey, I'm not, you know, do as I say, not as I do, not, you know, hey, I'm trying to do what I'm trying to tell you to do. So we had these open events for our local freestyle and Greco qualifiers, and Mike would wrestle in them. And most of the time, Mike, whatever you know about Mike's technical prowess, he could walk the walk on the mat, and he was a highlight film. He liked doing the, you know, the stuff that makes people go, ooh, during a match. So, you know, and I liked watching him. I remember him when he was a kid, when he was in high school, and then when he comes back and he starts coaching, I'm watching him. So I'm watching him sit in corners, and then when he goes out there to wrestle, I'm on top of it. I'm watching. So it was later in the match, and I guess he was a little bit on the fatigue side, and he gets belly to back on the kid. And I'm watching. I'm like, oh boy, he's gonna 5-pointer this kid. And then he, you know, he steps around, he tries to pop his hips, and the kid's toes are still dragging on the mat a little bit. He steps around, he tries to pop his hips again, and the kid's toes are still dragging on the mat. And then he puts his knee in front of the kid's thigh and doinks the kid down to the mat and puts the kid on his belly. And I couldn't have been more than 15 feet away from him. And I just start yelling, boo! Boo!
He started booing me. I was like, am I getting booed right now?
He's on top, and he's, you know, like, you know, trying to act like he's turning the kid, but all he's doing is just like looking through his hairs all over his face, and he's just like shaking his head. So now let's fast forward, I don't know, another 6 or 7 years. We're at training camp for Team New Jersey. So, you know, the coaches used to roll around a little bit after practice. So Mike and I shake hands, and we start wrestling, and he puts my feet on the rafters, puts me on the back of my head, and then he stands up and he goes, boo! Boo!
It was a nice
like,
2-over.
Boy, if I ever had anything coming, that was it right there.
But okay.
But that's the ball breaking, you know, like that's the
yes.
That was important to us, and it took a certain type of kid to be in our room. Right. Because you had to expect that. And the more bouts you won, the harder we went at you.
Oh yeah.
And I could tell you, the kids that came to work out with us, they could give it back. I mean, two of my favorites of all time are this kid named Will Key. Will Key may have placed in the Jersey High School States his senior year, but I'm not sure if he did. I think he slipped in for a 5th or a 6th. But his junior year of high school, he made the finals of Greco out of juniors, and his senior year he took 5th. Well, this kid, you couldn't control him with his comments, and he crossed. Will, come on, jeez, this is his second day of practice. Relax. You know, you had to keep an eye on him. And then Zach Ray,
because he was busting balls too much.
Oh, he couldn't stop. He couldn't help himself. And he was the worst, you know, like kid to like you'd always want Will to be your demonstration partner so you could put it on him. But you didn't want him to be your partner because he'd always make things difficult. Like he'd always turn the wrong way, put his hand in the wrong spot, and he knew what he was doing because he knew the technique. And he was just he's, you know, like, and you couldn't not like him. He was good. He was funny. He had good timing. He was good. And like I was saying, Zach Ray, he was
Zach
oh my
Ray
God.
might be the most low-key funny kid
Oh,
ever. He's hilarious. He's Dude,
so smart, and he was so quick.
he burned me and Coach Myers in Fargo so bad. Oh my God. Keep talking about Zach Ray, because I got to remember exactly what he said. He burned me and Myers so bad in a corner one time. We were talking to a ref. Like, we were talking to a ref, but what we were doing was getting the ref to notice something that their athlete was doing, and I can't remember what it was. He just it got to the point where he said something, and me and Myers both like put our head in our hands,
Yes.
like, oh, he got us.
And I'm going to assume he just happened to be in the area. Maybe his kid was on deck, or he was walking by. Or is this when he was in high school?
No. He's coaching for Team Pennsylvania.
Right. Yes, that's what I mean. So like he just happened to be walking by and insert himself.
Oh, just brilliant. Like, all right. So if you're building a wrestling coaching staff, give me the 3 things that or 2 or 3 things that you find most important in starting a staff, whether that be you as the head coach and building your assistants, or however you want to do it.
Okay. So, the first thing I would check it would be where do these people stand philosophically? So, I'd ask them to rank what's important to them about wrestling, and if they didn't come right out and give these rankings in the correct order, I'd sit them down and talk to them about their order and see if I could change their mind. If I could change their mind, I think they'd fit in with me. First responsibility, the sport comes first. Wrestling comes first. So every decision you make is based on how is this going to be good for wrestling, the sport. And then second would be the kids. The kids come second. The kids don't supersede the sport. Sport comes first. Now, by doing right by the sport, you're almost always going to do right by the kids. Third, everything else. Everything else. The team, the club, the community, the parents, everything else involved in wrestling. It doesn't matter which one of them. You can make any one of them third, because everything else after the sport and the kids is ancillary. It's collateral. So that I want somebody who thinks that way. And if they think that way, I think everything else is going to fall into place in most cases.
Okay. Then,
like, I don't want somebody to say team comes first. The team comes first to me is the worst philosophy in the history of anything athletic or any team related thing. Is just it's a cop out. My coach told me, he said, don't prostitute the kids. I'm like, what is don't prostitute the kids? Like, I'm not getting these kids hookers. What do you think I'm No, don't prostitute the kids. Don't have the kids do well to make you look good. And that's probably why I'm so poor at self-promoting, because it's not me. It's not about me. It's about those kids. He told me if the team wins, the coach looks good. If the kids win, the kids look good. So who do you want to make look good? So that's why if I'm picking a staff, those are the guys I want. And everything else, I could teach them, technique. They could show up with nothing. That's easy to fix.
It doesn't matter.
Yes.
It's okay. So what would you say to someone then that okay. What do you say to parents? Because you've had a slew of crazy ass parents that will interject
Right.
their need for their son to be successful, or daughter, I guess, to be successful in this sport.
So
how do you deal with them?
I might not be the most diplomatic person in the world. I'm also blessed, in my opinion, with a certain level of contempt. And when someone expresses values that I think are counterproductive to a kid's development, it's like they don't exist to me. Like if they're not, like it just, like
It's just the level of contempt is just it's.
But I can't. It's not helpful. It's not helping. You know what I mean? Like so.
Right, but
there's a certain amount of diplomacy that hurts all people involved, and now we're talking about a kid.
Give me the level.
It doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean I'm right.
Give me. It doesn't matter. Give me the level of diplomacy that is counterproductive. Give me that conversation that you've heard a million times,
Yeah,
and I know exactly what you're talking about.
I try and make the parent feel better at the expense of the kid going and takes a step in the wrong direction. And when a kid takes a step in the wrong direction, the odds are there's going to be a second step and a third, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you're in a hole. If I could give you two things, one of two things, it's going to make all the difference in the world. I can give you a ladder or I can give you a shovel. Sometimes these parents are handing their kids shovels and they're digging a hole deeper. I'm going to give the kid a ladder. And if I have to encourage the parent to not continue the conversation, and if that's what it takes to give that kid a ladder, that's what I'm going to do.
Can you give me an instance without saying names, of course?
Yeah. I got a bunch of things like flashing through my head. I can't narrow down on one of them right now, but I could. So I had a kid that he did such a great job. One year he took third out in Akron and he took second in Fargo. And his workout partner, I shouldn't say, one of his workout partners was a kid who just started wrestling that year. Like that spring, he came to practice. So he went to his high school coach. He was in 9th grade. He says, "Coach, I want to join the wrestling team next year." And the coach said, "Okay, go here." Because they do a nice job with kids who are just learning how to wrestle. So the kid came to practice. And this kid who made the finals out of cadets, one of his workout partners is a kid who just started wrestling. The dad's like out of his mind. You can't let him practice with him. Yeah, he can. He likes practicing with him. It's not the only kid he's working out with, but that would be, like when you pick partners, he go, "I want that kid." Why did he want that kid? Kid was a little bit bigger than him. The kid would get up fast after every rep. And, the kid had a good athleticism and a good balance to him. He ended up being a great partner. And one of the reasons why this kid did so well towards the end of the year is because of having a training partner that didn't have any of the wrestling social norms that sometimes get in the way when kids are drilling. When kids are training together and the one kid doesn't want to give up too much, and all the drilling sessions turns into a live
wrestling.
You know what I mean? And other headaches like that. So in any case, I had to explain to this guy, this kid's a good drilling partner. Your son's doing a nice job. Let it go. And, it works out. I had another parent. He came, this is when I was coaching the high school team. I'm walking out of practice and this guy comes around the corner and you could he wasn't on two wheels, but you could see how one side of the car kind of came a little bit higher than the other. And he gets out of the car, he slams the door, he comes hustling over to me, and I got my bag over my shoulder and I got my key in the door of my car, and he comes running over. He says, "I got to talk to you." And I turn around and go, "Just 1 second." I take a bag off my shoulder, unlock my door, put my bag in my car, close the door, and turn around and say, "How can I help you?" And he's out of his mind because his kid's not getting a wrestle off. Now, I had a policy. If you're a returning varsity wrestler for the first event of the year, you get the spot, unless there's another returning varsity wrestler. So this kid, fantastic. He didn't wrestle the year before. He took a year off. So now he's in 11th grade. And, I said, "Listen, he's going to be able to wrestle the higher weight class. He's probably going to win the weight class anyway. He goes, but he's supposed to wrestle off. Wrestling's about wrestle offs, this, blah, blah, blah. I said, listen, he's going to get a chance to wrestle for whatever weight class he wants after this event. It's my rule. It's to, reward the kids for the previous season moving into this season. Everything after this, we'll have wrestle offs and we'll put the best kid in the weight, but he's got to go up a weight classes. Guy shakes my hand, says, I see your point, and walks away. My assistant coach he goes, I never seen anything like this. He goes, you did a Jedi mind trick on this guy. He's on 2 wheels pulling in here. I'm thinking I'm going to have to pull him off of you. But some parents are willing to listen to reason. You asked me to give you an example. I don't know if I could give you an example of someone who didn't listen to reason, because if they didn't, the conversation's just over.
That's it.
It takes 2 people to argue. I mean, you ever see one person arguing with nobody? It doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't happen. Joel, I am hijacking this conversation. I apologize. Do you have anything before I go on?
Yeah. You shared several stories here about kids of all different skill levels. How do you balance a practice with kids who are maybe just learning to wrestle with also a room full of very high level wrestlers?
High level wrestlers, people who
don't sugarcoat. See,
I know,
this.
I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. You should know better. But I'm trying not to. By whose terms? High level wrestler. You know what I mean? Like, the kid wins Fargo. All right, great. But I mean, if I sit down and I watch them wrestle for 40 seconds, I have my hands in my head like this. I'm like, I can't believe this kid's doing this. So, they're no different to me. The kid who's just starting out, they're no different. I mean, if we're, my coach was a silver certified, the NCEP program, USA Wrestling, started that in the early 80s. My coach was like one of 5 coaches who were silver certified in the country. There were 2 gold certified, and there were less than 10 silver certified, and he was one of them. So we learned how to wrestle through that system, 7 basic skills, and et cetera, et cetera. And so, stance, motion, level change, penetration, lift, back step, back arch. And we practice each skill every day in increments, and sometimes, cumulative, sometimes all at the same time, in the same movement or the same technique. I don't think I ever coached a kid that had them all, that could do them all the time. Not a single kid. So if the kid's first practice, he got to work on his stance, his motion, his level change, penetration, back step, back arch. And, so an athlete that Mike and I both worked with, Tyler Fraley. Tyler Fraley probably hit more 5-point throws that weren't awarded 5 than any 3 kids I ever coached hit 5-pointers. Mm-hmm. That's not including the ones that he was awarded the 5 points for. Tyler could do it all. He could do every one of those skills. He was probably the kid that I didn't have to watch practicing his back steps and his back arches. I mean, he had it. He just had it. But there weren't too many other kids, and, whatever names I mentioned that, no matter what success they had on the open level or the youth level or collegiate, there was always plenty to fix. There was always, you're either getting better or you're getting worse. You're either creating good habits or you're creating bad habits for all of them. So a new kid and the kid who's winning medals out at the national events, to me, there's really not much different. They all need the same amount of help.
So you probably have a bit of a hot. What is the hottest take that you either tell kids or tell parents that they think you're crazy for? Because if nothing else, you are a full of hot takes.
Easy. That development is more important than winning. And it's hard for parents want their kids to get their hand raised, and if the kid is if a kid's doing something and the kid's winning, it's hard to convince a parent we got to make some adjustments here. And like I like, to me, I can't see it any other way. And you know, I always ask kids, you know, what's your finish line? So Anthony Ashnold had won 2 state tournaments in New Jersey, and he was undefeated. So we're out at Fargo, and I asked him, you know, he placed both styles, and I asked him, I said, what's your finish line in wrestling? And that's the question I ask kids, what's your finish line? He goes, what do you mean finish line? I said, when you're done wrestling, what do you want to have? What do you want to say you've done? What's your accomplishment? He goes, I want to be the best in the world. And I said, I'm so happy for you. I said, because if you told me that you wanted to be an undefeated 4-time New Jersey state champ, I think I might have had to pick my hands up. To know that you have that, you know, so if you want to be the best in the world someday, then you're going to constantly try to improve. And if that's your goal, no matter what happens in between now and then, it's okay. No matter who you lose to, no matter how heartbreaking the disappointment is, it's not your finish line. You know, now if you're, you know, at a certain age and you're wrestling in the world finals and you lose, now you got to make a decision. You coming back next year or not? And if you're not coming back next year, well, then, you know, that's that. But, you know, you're 16 years old. There's plenty of time. And he's not the only kid that I asked, and he's not the only kid that gave me a good answer like that. But I've had a few kids, and I've had a bunch of parents. I asked the parents, what's your finish line for your kid? And, you know, I want him to be a region champ. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm dealing with. But it, in a certain context, they don't know any better, but some of them do. Some of them should know better.
Oh.
But development,
that's
the biggest stumbling block sometimes, is they can't wrap their head around the cost of development. The cost of development is you're going to lose. You're going to lose in the context of trying to be better at wrestling, but that match isn't your finish line match. So you'll be okay. You know, everybody has heartbreak in wrestling. You know, I saw this, you know, back and forth on Twitter. Might have been a week or so before Fargo. People complaining about how heartbreaking a loss was, and certain people implying, if they're not outright saying, that a heartbreaking loss can only be at a high level event. That's who? You know, I lost to the kid in the JV county tournament, and I sat in a corner and cried for 20 minutes. That's pretty heartbreaking.
Sure.
You know, I lost in the finals with 10 seconds to go in the world team trials. That's heartbreaking too. But my emotional response and your emotional response, you can't control how you feel. No. If it hurts, it hurts. And that's that. People try to judge it or put a value on it. It's silly.
What does the conversation look like when you get kids whose finish line isn't where you want it to be?
I can't pick their finish line. They can. If their finish line is, you know, by the end of 12th grade, they still have, if they're coming to practice, that they still have to go through practice. Like I'm running practice that they're going to want to be a world champ someday.
So you don't even, your finish line for them is different.
Yeah. My finish line for them is they have to get better. They have to get better. They have to.
So you probably more than anyone I've ever met strictly adheres to development over W's. Probably more so than anyone I can think of. Has there ever been a point where you felt close to sacrificing that? Have you ever felt like, because I can remember being like, so folk style, right? My big thing is you got to be able to get off bottom. Like you have to, like that is a non-negotiable. And everything up until the NCAA finals, you're going to spend making sure that you can get, because that's the pinnacle of folk style wrestling is the NCAA final. Sure. Well, I remember there was a match. Our kid was struggling on bottom. The kid that he's wrestling was very good on top. And if he wins this match, he goes to the national tournament. If he loses this match, there's a toss up. Like he could still wrestle back, take third, still go to the national tournament. But we're up by 1, third period, our choice.
Right.
And I look at my assistant coaches and I go, I really want to choose neutral. They're like, but he wouldn't develop. And I'm like, I hate you for saying that. But we chose down. He got out, and he got out in like 10 seconds. But the point is, there are times that I make a conscious decision with the development of the athlete in mind, but it's not always easy.
So there's a whole lot of rationalizing that goes on because, well, if the kid advances to the next event, now we have all this extra development. He's got another week of training for something that's super important. So in those situations, I have in the past put a kid on his feet. And the gravity of a certain match or a certain event is going to dictate how you make that call. There is development in qualifying for the next event. So, I see exactly what you're saying.
Don't let my son hear that. Do not let him hear that. God Lord. Sorry, go ahead.
It's just there's that's the thing about wrestling, and I'm sure it's important in other sports too, but there's just so much growth that getting better at wrestling is just a way to give you practice at getting better at considerably more important things. So if you're sacrificing a kid's development on bottom to get them to accomplish something that might give them confidence in something else, there's always a benefit. But when you the difference between when you're doing it for other reasons, you can't lie to yourself. You can't lie to yourself. And
there is a rationalization that goes on in your head,
right?
And you have you have a finite amount of time to make these decisions.
Of course, there's a situation where like you see a high school bench, and it's the third period, and there's 3 coaches on the bench, and top, bottom, or neutral. The ref goes top, bottom, or neutral. The kid looks over to his bench, and they're like the 3 monkeys. One guy's going like this, one guy's going like this, one guy's going like this, and the kid looks over and he's like, "What the?"
Yeah.
And listen, I'm not going to act like I get it right all the time. That's just silly talk right there. I mean, my gosh, but that's part of it. Like that's part of the development. If you're not working to develop, what are you doing? Just a way. It's just a waste of time. If whatever you're doing,
it's a far more daunting a task putting a kid on a path of development as opposed to a path of the finish line being the region. Yeah. It's harder to coach. It's harder to parent because golly, talking to those, especially like, my son is really into it. He really enjoys the sport, and talking to him after losses and keeping development at the forefront of his mind. Whew, that's not easy, man. How did you do it as a dad?
I think that I can't begin to express how lucky I am on my son's perspective on wrestling. And he started wrestling in kindergarten, and we first started going to I think they called them jamborees or whatever when he was in first grade. You know, the type of event where they raise both kids' hands after each match, and he did that up until he was in third grade. And then third, fourth, and fifth grade, he wrestled in the JV level of our youth league. And then sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, he wrestled on what they consider the varsity level of our youth league. And he wrestled in high school, and now he's in college. But I mean, my son has just been great about jumping on board with this development thing. I mean, he wants to win, of course, but he's got context, he's got perspective. And, you know, he's always, you know, he's pretty finish line oriented. And he has a great perspective. Doesn't mean he likes losing.
No.
And he certainly wants to win the next bout for sure. And, but, you know, he's resilient. He bounces back after, you know, if he falls short, goes back to the drawing board, and it's awesome. And to be honest with you, I don't think there's any manufacturing that. I don't think there's anything that I could have done to help it or steer it in a different direction. I think that's just how he's wired, and that's, you know, what he chose. That's a path I think he chose to take. I mean, I know one thing. I told him, and you know, and even now he's wrestling in college, and I've told him, you know, since he's graduated high school, I said, if my greatest fear, my worst failure as a human being would be if you are wrestling because you think I want you to.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love the fact that he wrestles, but if he didn't want to wrestle, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Right.
But if he wrestled because he thought he had to wrestle because of me, like that's, to me, that would be the worst failure in my life in any kind. There's no close second there. That would be the worst, because, you know, knowing that I've been a coach his whole life, and before, I mean, he's born in 2003. I stopped coaching a high school team in 2007. So in you know, in New Jersey high school wrestling standards, I dropped off the face of the earth before my kid could even walk.
Right.
Well, he was probably walking at that point, but you know.
Yeah, but I get the point though.
He definitely didn't put on a pair of wrestling shoes. That's for sure.
Yeah. We are getting close on time. All right. Magic wand. You got a magic wand. You can change one thing about the sport of wrestling. What is it?
Oh my gosh. Can I change that? What if I were allowed to change the perspectives of people who pay attention to wrestling?
In what way?
Can I do that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, that's what I want to do. Here's what I want to do. I want to get the people who pay attention to wrestling to not burden themselves on what people who don't pay attention to wrestling think about wrestling. That's what I want. When the wrestling community chases, I think the wrestling community chasing after non-wrestling people to like wrestling is counterproductive. I'm not sure if that's a proper sentence or not.
Yeah, I understand.
Here's how, in my opinion, here's how you increase.
You don't want to say the word grow wrestling.
You want to grow. Here's how you grow. Here's how you grow wrestling.
It's gross. It's gross because it's so overused. But go ahead.
Fair enough. Here's how you grow wrestling. You coach kids that love wrestling, and when they have kids, they encourage their kids to get involved in wrestling. And you build wrestling with new wrestlers. You build wrestling through participation by people who are actually going to put on their wrestling shoes, step in the middle of the mat, shake hands, and wrestle. You don't do it backwards. You don't put people in the stands so people go wrestle. Mm-hmm. You don't put wrestling on TV so people go wrestle. It doesn't work that way. It never does, and it's a waste of time. Mm. And when people chase that carrot, the stick is never going to get any shorter. The carrot's always going to be that far away. You grow wrestling from the bottom up. And then if enough people, and that's exactly what's going on.
Okay,
despite wrestlers' best effort, the wrestling community's best efforts, it's still happening. We're
No doubt.
7,000 plus people, kids wrestling out at juniors.
Yes.
Right. And then, you go back 10 years ago and they're making the announcement that there are 3,000 wrestlers and people are doing backflips.
Mm-hmm.
Build it from the bottom up. Don't chase something that you're never going to catch. And we're never going to catch mainstream notoriety.
Yeah.
But if we have 7,000 kids wrestling at juniors, eventually they're going to be adults and they're going to be the people who are wanting. So my point is, when we change, when we add an extra point to a takedown in collegiate wrestling, when we change a freestyle and Greco-Roman takedown from 1 point to 2 points, who are we helping? It's just nonsense. I'm embarrassed to be a wrestling person when stuff like this happens.
And how up in arms people get about it.
It's such an act of futility. And like people think that that's going to, and we talked about this a little bit when we were in Fargo. Wrestling is boring because wrestlers choose to be boring.
Mm-hmm.
If wrestlers choose to be exciting, wrestling becomes exciting. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. And there's no rule that's going to legislate it one direction or the other. No one goes into a match and tries to not score. They just know the opportunity is not there, so they're not going to take a risk. But then you get those crazy guys that are like, I'm going anyway.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens.
All right.
But yeah, that's my gripe. The wrestling community is chasing a carrot that is tied to a stick, and that stick's not getting any shorter.
So why do I'm trying to look at the numbers of high school participation.
It's up.
It's what?
It's up. It's increasing.
It's increasing.
And we have girls.
I don't know if I don't. Yeah, that's the whole thing. We're adding a gender. We're adding another 50% of the population. So I'm not really going to look at it. That said,
like if people spend their time worrying about development, if they worry about getting more kids interested, if they're worrying, and I say kids, I mean kids who want to put wrestling shoes on.
Right.
If we spend all of our energy at the NWCA or whatever these other organizations are, let's increase participation. Let's increase opportunities.
It puts a thought in my head though. I agree with you. It puts a thought in my head though that we do such a bad job of retaining fans. We do such a bad job of it. So that to me is like where the crux is. Like all right.
You can't
all the kids that I went to high school with, right? The guys that I had on my wrestling team in high school. I can't think of one of them that pays more than just ancillary attention to the sport. Why is that?
Okay. So why is that? Is because life,
Sure.
There's just other things that they're doing. But let me ask you this. Do any of them have kids that joined a team? I would say yes. I would say because of your coach in high school,
Mm-hmm.
because of your high school coach was the type of coach
Mm-hmm.
that wrestling's going to be important to kids who are on his team.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them, because you can't win all of them.
Sure.
But
a handful.
I would say that because of your coach, there are kids you went to high school with whose kids either tried wrestling or they're still doing it.
Mm-hmm. Probably right.
And as coaches, if we promote the sport in that way, like I was insulted once when I was coaching a high school team. A coach came up to me. He goes, you're teaching coaches. You're not teaching wrestlers, or you're building coaches, or whatever his goofy ass, what he thought was an insult, I took as a compliment. I said, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm doing. I want the kids that are learning wrestling from me to be involved in wrestling for the rest of their life. And I know I'm, like, what are the numbers, like if I'm at 10%,
you're crushing it.
Yeah, that's huge.
Crushing it.
That's huge. And I think I'm pretty close to that. And that's way more important than, I promote that part of my coaching legacy. How's that?
Sounds good. All right, Matthew. How do people? Oh shit! I can't even get a hold of you. I don't know how other people are going to get a hold of you.
Eclipse Gut on Twitter or whatever the hell it's called now. At Eclipse Gut.
Okay. All right, because he doesn't answer his phone and he still has a flip phone.
That's not true anymore.
All right. Thank you very much, brother. I appreciate
Always a
you coming
pleasure.
on, and I will make sure.
Listen, I'm gonna blow a little smoke right now for you.
Oh,
you're one of my best friends in the sport, and you're one of the best people, one of the best technicians. I enjoy how you do almost everything you do, with the exception of putting me in my head at training camp. Still not happy about that.
Always a pleasure, Matthew Ciampa. I'll talk to you soon, brother.